In this episode of the Smart City podcast, I have a great conversation with Danielle Storey. This is the third time Danny's been on the podcast. This time we talk about smart city governance and the importance of frameworks in this space. This was supposed to be just a short bonus episode, but I think it's going to be a long bonus episode. Anyway, I hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed making it.
It's the Smart City Podcast, whoa, with Smart City experts, here we go. Connecting smart technology, both big and small. Smart cities are making life better for all. Big data, emerging trends, self-driving cars and more. The Smart City Podcast is what you're looking for.
Hello, Danny. Welcome back to the Smart City Podcast.
Thanks, Zoe, and all the listeners, and it's good to be back.
Excellent. So just for people that haven't heard your previous episode, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're passionate about?
Sure. I'm Danielle Storey, the Chief Innovation Officer of Smarter Technology Solutions. We're essentially a specialist smart city consulting and system integration company, working with some of the leading smart cities in Australia and helping them build out their vision and their strategy, and also then our engineering teams get on the tools and actually build and help that vision come to life. So it's pretty exciting what we get into, and it's been great to see so many different councils over the last 3 or 4 years. So I'm very excited about what the next few years bring.
Yeah, awesome. So last time you came on the podcast, I had the previous set of questions. So what we're going to do, we'll just jump through a couple of these first, and then we really want to talk about governance. Danny and I have been speaking for a while now just about different aspects of smart cities and how governance is so important. So let's start with, what is a smart city to you?
I think a smart city to me, and this may vary from my previous answer, so it'll be interesting to see, but I think really it's about aspiring to do things better, and whether better is more sustainably, to better support the local economy, or whether that's, about services and the communities we live in. But I think overall, the sort of blanket answer I often give is it's using data and technology to be more efficient and effective in how we run cities and how we deliver services to the community. But obviously that does vary very wildly from other different people's perspectives. But it's really about just aspiring to be better, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And why do you think that this concept is so important?
I think, there's a few things. I think I heard a quote from a council in the Northern Territory in the last few months, and it's really stuck with me. And the gist of it is that the places where we live are important. And I think that sums it up really well. So obviously we all live in cities and towns and communities, and we all understand the sense of why having close-knit communities with strong economies and, living sustainably is really important. And if you ask anyone who's deciding where to live, they'll be talking about things like the livability aspect. So it's pretty clear to me why the whole smart city concept's important. And, fundamentally it's because that's where we live and it's where we spend our time and it's where people raise their families and things like that. So, yeah, in a nutshell, I think the answer is because where we live is important.
Yeah, cool. So you've been working across Australia for the last, couple of years. So how do you think Australia is embracing the smart city concept? And I'm interested to hear whether you think it's gaining momentum, or it's stable now, or people, it's more mature, or it really depends on which area you're in. So that was about 3 questions.
So yes, Australia-wide, I think it does vary a lot. And you were asking those questions, and you mentioned the word maturity. And I do think that in the last year, I've certainly noticed, and I think our whole team would have noticed, that there does seem to be a maturing mindset in terms of what smart cities is, what's possible. It's a bit less blurry, I think, although, there's still a lot of work to be done. I think globally, we do really well in some aspects. Obviously, given the drought and the topical nature that is water in Australia, I think that's an area where we could probably do better. And there's some real synergies with WaterStart, I think it's called, in Nevada, which is obviously in the US, in the desert, similar challenges. So I do see opportunities for global collaboration where some of these use cases, some of these particular problems are so challenging. So that's one, is I think we could probably do better at collaborating with regions with similar problems. I also think that globally, I have listened to some of the podcasts historically on your show, and I probably don't feel as that we're so far behind. Certainly, some of the global case studies do a great job of marketing, but boots on the ground, what they're delivering is not overly dissimilar to what we're delivering here, but perhaps they do it in a more mature way in terms of all the governance and the structure and the direction and the leadership, because they've been doing it that bit longer. And just before the call, Zoe and I were talking about some councils that have gone out and done all the technology testing and are now working out, okay, from what we've learnt, how do we now integrate all that into our business process and systems and whatever? And initially when you think about that approach, that seems a bit silly that you go and do things and then figure out how it all fits in. But sometimes that's actually the quickest way of working out what's needed, because some of the holes and some of the gaps are so blatantly obvious, which sitting in an office with a pen and paper, it's difficult to forecast. So I think there's merit in different approaches. And, to sum your question up, I think, yes, things are maturing. I don't think we're ridiculously behind globally, but I think we could certainly do better. And I would like to see some more global collaboration on some key issues where we know we've got synergies with other regions.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think that's became quite apparent when I started talking to people, particularly other people that are working in Australia, but then when we went on the Future Leaders, Future Cities delegation to Japan. Not to say Japan is behind by any means, but I just felt like Australia definitely is up there in that conversation. And, there's peaks and troughs with every country, every region, even every city. I think where we're really ahead is, but again, continue to improve, is we have really strong kind of standards when it comes to environment. Like, we know how important the environment is. Whether we act on that or not always is questionable. But I think we have the mechanism there that we can really thrive, to embrace the environmental aspects as well as, the safety aspects and quality aspects as well. So I think we're doing really well in that area as long as we continue to follow those where appropriate. But also I think when we follow those to a T when it doesn't make sense, that causes issues as well. So that ability to fail is not really there. And so talking about that council we were speaking of earlier, they went out there and some things worked and some things didn't work, but that was okay. So then they could learn from that, and then how that would vary the way that they embed the smart city officers or champions or whatever you want to call them into their business. It wasn't just, this is how we're going to do it. And it wasn't a linear approach. It was very circular, looking from the outside in. So I think that's one thing. And I think what I found was we adopt technology, like boring technology, or what we consider boring, quite easily and without any, too much kicking and screaming. Like, I just think of payment technology, PayWave and those type of things. When we went to Japan, it was like cash based, which I've used that as an example a couple of times, but I think it is relevant because, even online banking and those type of things, like we've had that for years and years. Not to say that Japan doesn't, I'm not sure, but just some of those really simple, integrated, boring technologies that people see real value in and efficiency in, then we just do it. We just go out and do it on a mass scale. But I think the important thing is that we have choice. Some people still want to go into the bank, so they are able to do that. And I think that's what a smart city really is actually not just putting technology everywhere and everyone must use this, but actually laying it out, and then people have choice. And it's about education, I think, and even in the smart city space, I think about the smart citizen. If people don't know that they're smart citizens, then, we've got a problem. So I think that education piece, and that really comes with maturity, because you can't educate people if you don't know what it is yourself, or, accepting that you don't know everything, but actually starting to educate people about what it is we are trying to do, being really open, honest and transparent about that.
Absolutely. I think that's the human aspect of the smart city, right? Is, all this technology and all this data is great, but fundamentally part of where we live and who we are as people is having that choice. And I think you summed it up really well there.
Cool. Thanks. I think I got a bit ranty there for a second. But I think it kind of leads into the governance discussion that we were hoping to have. I think I'm really keen to hear your thoughts, so I'm going to shut up. And what do you think is so important about smart city governance?
Well, the thing that Zoe and I were talking about before the call is, what is governance? And I guess depending on the person you're talking to, that might mean policy and procedure and auditing. To someone else, that might mean, vision and leadership and a documented strategy. For others, that might be, technical architecture frameworks and making sure that when we build all these things, that they do fit together nicely and that they do all talk and we can share data between organizations. And I think most of the governance discussion depends on the lens on which you're looking through. So there's a couple of elements that I think we can loosely group together. And I think that is what I would term things like leadership and vision. And that's, where are we going? What are we aspiring to be? How will we know when we get there? It's a fairly straightforward thing, and it's the bulk of what the consulting work we've been doing has been, is helping councils that haven't yet embarked on smart cities to realise, okay, well, what are we trying to achieve? What will success look like? Why are we doing it? What are the outcomes? What are the problems we're solving? And then wrapping that up into a nice, I guess, pretty document that can go out to the public to say, look, this is what we're trying to achieve, and we actually want your opinion, because, again, the governance piece is not just internal council-led, but also should be in strong consultation with both those internal stakeholders and the external public. But I have found, and I will sort of state for those listening who are kind of embarking on this step, is sometimes people don't know what they want because they don't understand the context of the question. So if they don't know what smart cities is and what it's capable of, then their suggestions are not going to be coming from a place that understands what's possible. So it's kind of that parallel education and consultation piece. So I don't know anyone who's nailed that yet either, so please, I don't profess to have all the answers. But some of the structured workshops and education pieces we've done, followed by, ideation sessions that are a bit more interactive, I think usually get there. But, the biggest challenge is having to realise that people who don't live and breathe this whole smart cities ecosystem every day don't understand that, there's data available that can solve some of the transport issues, or that there's bin fill level monitoring that can optimise how we collect our waste bins, or, lighting that can optimise safety and energy consumption and those sorts of things. And I guess it comes back to the question is, what lens are we looking through here? Like, what are we trying to achieve? Because in isolation, they're just technology, and that's lovely. We all know I like technology, but if it's not delivering an outcome addressing a need, my point there is usually that it should be at the bottom of the pile. And most cities have got 2 or 3 key issues, be it parking or traffic or crime or whatever, that they need to address in order to make their cities more livable. And, I think that undertone needs to be captured as well as the community sentiment before putting the smart city spin on it. So in summary, that the strategy and the vision and the leadership needs to be around the challenges and problems or what we're aspiring to be. So then the next level of detail can be added. But I think it's important to be clear on what the problems are, what you're trying to achieve before you go too far, because it's really easy to get bogged down in the detail of what sort of streetlights do we want, when the problem is, community safety, and we want to be able to turn the lights up when the bars are closing and people are spilling into the streets or whatever. So I think, the leadership, the vision, having a clear direction and strategy, that's co-created and consultated internally and externally, because I think that is, it's a critical element. You don't want some consultants sitting in a room by themselves coming up with ideas. That's not how good vision happens. So in a nutshell, I think there's some key points there around, leadership and vision around the governance. Often that activity spills out into, okay, we've got some gaps around policy, and procurement's been very topical in the last few weeks in the industry. I know ASCA have been running webinars on it. I know the public-private partnership model's being thrown around a lot. But in reality, I think once you've got a nice clear vision, we need to look at, okay, well, for where we are now, what's some of the major gaps and barriers to getting there? And often the procurement policy is a 12-month process, or the way that budgeting happens, you kind of get it allocated or you don't. And there's a whole range of things you could look at. So I think that gap analysis and review of, given the strategy, what's missing in our business process within council to make it happen, and then externally, what structures or mechanisms or stakeholder engagement pieces are missing in order to make it happen.
Yeah, I agree. I was just going to add that I think definitely leadership and vision, and I think maybe it's one and the same, but appetite. I found like having conversations with councils that have the appetite for the smart city or whatever they're calling it, it doesn't matter. All those other things are just seem to me now are excuses. When they have that appetite to change, then magic, happens, with budget and policy and all those type of things. But it comes down to strong leadership. And if you don't have that, and not strong as in even good management or whatever, it's more about that vision, that like exactly what you're saying, vision and leadership. And I think within that, you can't just have a strong leader. You actually need people, and I guess a strong leader can create this, but having people empowered who are working underneath them that are empowered to make decisions and if we're all working towards the same direction, then we can kind of collaborate together towards that common goal. But if you and we don't have to, this manager has to report to this manager, to have to report to this manager, to have to report to this manager, because the further away you get from the original idea. So if the original idea is level 1, if you have to go up to a level, 6 to get approved, then people become less and less interested because they're further and further away from the actual, the inception of the idea. So then you got less and less interest, so then it becomes this non-prioritized thing. Whereas if a person down the bottom who's had the idea then can enact the idea, then you've got so much more push behind it because it was their idea and they want to see it succeed. And obviously you need some other governance around that to make sure that it's not just any old idea. But I think that having people empowered and inspired that they can actually make real change is really important, because otherwise people are just going to go in day to day and do their day-to-day thing, get their paycheck and go home. I think that's important as well.
Oh, absolutely. And often that first process I spoke of around leadership and vision, that is getting an idea on paper. Probably the one of the largest challenges, particularly if it's not a grant that's been awarded or budget that's already been allocated because people have managed to see the vision. But to then go and get financial support, resourcing, or even just approval within an organisation becomes really challenging. So I certainly agree with everything you just said there, Zoe. You do need a critical mass of interested parties, and I've heard a few different terms used in different councils to explain that, but it's kind of that snowball effect. As the more people you get behind an idea, the more momentum you seem to get, and that doesn't mean that that's good momentum either. I mean, with a clear vision and strategy, if we're all going the same direction, it definitely is really helpful. But without it, it's kind of like a net full of fish swimming in different directions. And, the net effect is that nothing moves. Yeah, I definitely agree there. So there are some other frameworks that often fall out of that, usually in that gap analysis stage where we might identify some structures or groups or steering committees or ways of engaging people at all levels. I've even seen some councils running lunchbox sessions where they're talking to staff about what Smart Cities is and what they're doing, and then seeking their engagement. And I think that's been quite successful. But it's a relatively informal process, but people are engaged, people can participate, people can be informed and interested. And I think, and I had another councillor actually tell me this, but when you look at smart cities, if you talk about smart cities and technology, it's no surprise that you might lose 50% of the audience in the opening lines. But if you ask people if they want to make their cities safer, create more local jobs, or fix the traffic problems, you rarely have someone who doesn't want to participate. So I think it also depends on how it's framed. So it's just a side note there, but I definitely agree with you that getting critical support at the right levels as well, because there's no point everyone at the operational level knows there's a problem and wants to solve it. You still need management buy-in and senior leadership buy-in and the common direction in order for, effective processes to occur.
Yeah, no, agree totally. And I think that the other thing that we need to really not focus on but be aware of is that when you've got people empowered within, you also need to have people empowered outside the organisation as well, those external stakeholders, because that's how you get, your full engagement. And I really like the idea of those lunchtime sessions, because that makes a lot of sense, because you don't want it to be so formal that, you lose half your audience, and then the half that's there, they feel like, oh, this is just another talk, or this is just another thing that, nothing will change. I think that's really important. And that when people are able to take their whatever hat off that they have and then just come in as human beings and go, I want to really fix this traffic problem because it causes issues within my community, then, like you said, who wouldn't want to do that if they're supported by their work environment? And I think it is about making a safe work environment so then people can, even if they have silly ideas, or what seem to be silly ideas, could actually really fundamentally change the way that maybe community engagement's done, or bringing ideas from different levels. And I think Andrew Grill, who I interviewed, he's a practical futurist. It was actually really interesting, is that digital diversity. So when you're talking about having those boards, I think it's important, but I think what's actually important is not necessarily the board itself, but how the board functions, which is and who's on that board and who can make decisions on that board. Because if, again, it's a board full of people that are just at the top, then they won't necessarily understand the issues that are coming up. It'll only be the really important ones that someone above someone that has gone to the board. And also, if it's about technology, you need to make sure that people across that board understand what the technology is, what it can and can't do, and what problems it can and can't solve as well, which I think is really hard to do if you don't understand the technology yourself. So I think there's that digital diversity is really important. So having people that maybe they are younger, or maybe they're just, tech-minded, you have those people as well as the people that aren't and have that wealth of experience in policy, regulation, or whatever it is. You need that across the board, because otherwise you're, again, just going to get decisions made that aren't necessarily the best for, the direction that we're trying to move in. So
yeah, and I think that point's really interesting, because it's certainly not for lack of care, but if you don't, particularly in the technology space, I find, if you have primarily non-technical people making decisions, things could look beautiful. And, technology vendors do a great job of demonstrating their product and hiding all the bits that they don't need you to see. And sometimes it does take that expertise to dig a little bit deeper to realise, what's the truth and what's, vaporware is the term that's often used. But, it's just having the right people in the room to make educated decisions. And I think sometimes decisions get made and people say, well, why the hell did that happen? It's not for lack of caring. It's just that some of these structures perhaps aren't in that way that they've got the right people in the room. So on that digital diversity, just one other thing I should add is it's really important to have a good mix of the operational levels, as you spoke of, but as equals in the room. So, me as an operational level telling the CEO I think his idea is terrible, you can imagine how that conversation would go if the frameworks around it aren't set to allow that conversation to happen and sort of leave the egos at the door, which again comes down to people and culture and a whole bunch of other things that is well off topic. But the other part is good male-female representation and good age diversity, because we all see the world very differently, and I think that that's the value of those kind of committees. So I would also just add on the steering committee or the working group or whatever you want to call it, not turning to that into something that we have meetings to discuss when we're setting meetings, and using it as something that becomes an overhead instead of meeting the purpose of the thing, whether it's setting the vision or making decisions or whatever. I think it's important to either break it down into smaller working groups to talk about the details, or keep clear focus on what you're trying to achieve and not make it governance heavy that it becomes a burden, because it just won't happen.
Yeah, and I think the other thing with governance and innovation, in the topic of innovation, is getting away from business as usual to allow people to innovate. Because if innovation is like, if you've got time, do some innovation, then it's never going to work. So allowing people to leave business as usual at the door for a certain period of time, or, whatever it is, obviously every business will be different, and then allow people to innovate is really important, because otherwise your business as usual takes over, and it always will, because, it's business as usual and you don't have time unless you create or unless you make time for that. So I think that's important too. And again, that comes down to governance, allowing people to have that time in culture and all that kind of stuff as well. But yeah.
I think long term it saves time too, right? So my favourite picture that I love
Totally.
bringing up at innovation events is a guy trying to drag things up a hill and another guy saying, mate, there's a better way of doing this. And he's holding two wheels. And he said, no, I'm too busy. And it's just
Yep.
exactly how
I love
it
that
is.
one too.
And, I think that we're always too busy to take a step back and think about if there's better ways of doing things. But just taking a step back, you actually do often create sometimes a bit more work in the short term to sort of make things more efficient and effective in the long term. And I kind of use those words deliberately because, I think long term, the most efficient ways of doing things are the ways that people are going to keep going towards. And I heard someone the other day say you should always ask the laziest person in the team because they'll find the best way of doing it that requires the least effort. And that's kind of stuck with me. But some of those policy reviews might be things like allowing, someone a day a month in a innovation workshop across the business. And yes, it's difficult to take people out of business as usual, but it's absolutely critical to the success of some of the organizations because the financial models, the resourcing models, they're just not working. Like, there's not a council I've been to in the last 3 years that haven't said that they're understaffed and that they're always under the pump. They can never get everything done that they want to, and there's got to be a better way of doing things. And they don't always use those words, but, the sentiment is that they're, under-resourced and, trying to get things done. There's a greater demand for services and there's less money to do it. And I think that's, it's a sign that it can't wait. So I think having those things in place does help. So when I talk about review and audit, I'm not talking about, just looking and saying, okay, well, how can we do smart cities better and going through a clipboard, but actually taking that step back and looking at the organisation and saying, look, if this is something we're serious about, and if we're going to change the way that we deliver services and we're going to change the way that we operate, then how are we going to get there? Who do we need to come on the journey? And I absolutely agree. The public from a different side of things, in the terms that they'll help you set priorities for the actual deliverables and what their concerns are and whatever else. But internally, you need people to come along for the ride, and change is not easy. And I think it's probably a bigger challenge than the technology and the actual implementation of, inverted commas, a smart city. But it's the important bit because the policy, the procedures, the framework behind it all, and people being on board to make it happen, that's the bit that actually moves the needle.
Mm. Quote I like is from Josh Field Milburn from The Minimalist is people don't necessarily not like change, but they don't like being changed. So I think that's where that education piece is really important and bringing people along the journey. Like if someone, if someone says to you tomorrow, oh, Danny, you're doing things like this now, this is more effective and efficient, you're going to go, hang on, what, why, how, when, what, who, no, I don't like that. But if someone comes and says, oh, hey, Dan, we're thinking about making this more efficient. What do you think about this, about this, about this? Oh, yep, that's a great idea. If it's an exchange rather than I'm telling you this is how we're going to do it, I think that will work. Easier said than done, but I think that's really important and similar with the community as well, which all comes back to that education piece. And the other important thing is when you ask people what they think and what they want, you actually want informed answers, informed opinions, because if you don't, then it's not going to work really well. So it actually, if you take the time to do that education piece, you're going to get more informed decisions and therefore you'll get a better result in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And I couldn't agree with that more. And I think we act surprised, though, in our working lives when people don't like to be changed and that change is thrust upon them. But if you look at any other relationship, be it, your kids, your husband, your wife, your partner, your friends, they don't like it when you come and tell them they're doing something either. It's
Yeah.
We're all humans, and it's that human aspect, I think, that is the bit that is difficult. And I think the difficult thing about it is that technology can only solve so much of that. There's tools to collaborate and there's tools to gather ideas and do surveys or whatever else, but you can't simulate that bit. People need to be engaged and informed, and their things and their ideas need to be considered. I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, but it always surprises me that that's so challenging when we do it day to day in our lives anyway. But we struggle when it's in a corporate or a organisational setting. So just food for thought. But I'm really keen to hear other people's opinion on that too, because it obviously is difficult,
totally.
but it's not surprising if we look at it in the same context we do some of our lives. So
yeah, cool. Well, it's been awesome to chat with you. I'm keen to hear, I know we're going a bit over, but I'm keen to hear if there are any other emerging trends that you've come across since we last spoke that have really, changed the way you've thought about things or are really interesting.
I would say there's probably been 1,000 things since we last spoke a couple of months ago that have changed, but there's a few that stick with me, and they're sort of the things that I'm hearing more and more. So the public-private partnerships I'm hearing a lot of, and I'm also hearing it from both sides. So councils don't really know how to go about it without getting in trouble. Organisations don't really know what's allowed and not allowed with councils in terms of public-private partnership. And I say councils, but I obviously mean a bit more broadly, because obviously the federal and state governments are also involved, and there's other stakeholders in the smart city piece. But public-private partnerships, what does that mean for us? How do we operate? How does that fit in with our governance structures? How does it fit in with our procurement policies? I can see that being another really challenging area, but it's something that's come up a lot since we last spoke. And probably the other thing is, I think regions and councils, now we're getting to that critical mass of people talking about smart cities that I can really feel a momentum building. And I'm kind of using the number of market requests and tenders and quotes and inquiries and things as the needle measure here. But it does seem to have almost doubled in the last few months. And I'm not sure if it's to do with the federal government's Smart Cities and Suburbs program being at, round 2's just closed, getting into round 3 soon. Whether people just understand that, this is something we can't ignore, or whether there's something greater driving that. But I've really noticed in the last sort of 6 months things accelerating, which is kind of, we kind of predicted this a few years ago. And I still think we're probably 2 years away from the critical mass. So I think we're at the start of the early adopters and at the start of the bell curve heading upwards. But I definitely feel that the more people talk and see and learn, the more they get engaged and want to do, or it prompts more questions in their mind. So it's kind of a summary of everything we just talked about on the call. But there definitely is people getting excited about smart cities, and with good vision and leadership and all the right frameworks in place, then the chances of success are much higher. But you also mentioned something that's really just stuck with me, and I totally agree, is people also need to be given permission to fail. Within councils, often, and not always, there's a real risk-averse culture, and I feel that that's slowly getting to a point where perhaps some small experiments that may fail are becoming more accepted. And I think that hopefully, that continues, because you're never going to get everything right, and if you have to be perfect before you do anything, then nothing's going to ever happen. So yeah, it's just an observation, and I'm not talking directly about the technology, but there's two things I think with the public-private partnership and with moving things forward, that risk culture. I'm not saying that we go be cowboys and do really silly things, but I think there does need to be an area of when you're doing innovative things, it's not always going to work. But I know some organisations will really struggle with that.
No, I agree, and I've been hearing more about those as well, and particularly I feel that momentum happening as well. Just the more I'm having more and more conversations, people understand what it is, and it's getting a bit easier to identify the gaps now, because it's not just like everything is a gap. Like, people know what it is. I think that initial term is widespread or ubiquitous, but like the smart city term or whatever that means. But now it's kind of going, okay, what does it really mean? Like, what is it, cutting through that hype and diving deep? So I'm really excited about that, because that's where I really want to sink my teeth in and really help some of the local councils kind of move forward in a way that's like, fun, friendly and useful to them, not just coming in with, here's a solution, let's put an autonomous vehicle in your city centre or whatever, but actually going, okay, what are your gaps? And like you said, very simple things that exist now. It's not super advanced technology, which I think is what might scare people, like, oh, well, I don't understand what blockchain is, so I can't do smart city. And where it's just like, oh no, sensors have been around for however many years, but now they're getting to a point where they're cheap enough and they're efficient enough, and they can they're powered in a way that is sustainable, and then we can kind of use that and put it into a system that's also efficient, so then we can use it across the different disciplines within councils and governments and just business in general. So yeah, I'm really excited.
Yeah, me too. And you just mentioned something, and I just want to point this out for people who might be listening, is I'm yet to meet a council who aren't doing sensors and data logging of some sort, whether that's just the strips across the road to count cars or traffic lights or whatever. There's not one council yet I've met that do no IoT and sort of smarts within their city. It's just that, now there's different technologies that are much more prevalent. So it's always funny, but totally agree with you that it's definitely gaining the momentum. And I think it's exciting to see because there are some problems we have in our cities and towns that don't need to be there. So I'm really, really looking forward to what that's going to bring. And you're absolutely right. You don't have to be doing robotics and machine vision and blockchain. You can start with some sensors and basic things to solve specific problems that help you address community and council needs. So yeah, I always enjoy these calls, Zoe, and I know we feed each other's tangents, but hopefully it's given people some insight around the governance procurement. It's quite a complex beast, as you can imagine, but
yeah, definitely.
I don't think it's nearly as complicated as people think.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I think I think we've gone into it enough. Anyway, if people have it's going to go another tangent. If people have any questions, queries, or want to join our conversation, I'm totally keen for that as well. So hit us up.
Excellent. Thanks, Zoe. And if you'll allow me a quick thing at the end here, there's a couple of events I'm getting involved in, and this is it's kind of related to the governance piece, but I'm speaking at the IoT Impact event in Sydney the 10th and 11th of October, I believe it is. No, September. Sorry, September. It's in Sydney. It's an IoT event for industry. It's run by I think it's the Internet of Things Alliance Australia that's running it. But the reason I mention this is the panel I'm speaking on is all about choosing the right smart city platform and how do you know that you're choosing the right thing. And there's a lot of work in the industry going into helping councils and cities to select the platform or the hub, the brain of the smart city. And so I just thought I'd mention that because if it's of interest, it's definitely one of the most challenging decisions that cities will have to make. And hopefully they get some wisdom out of that panel. There's certainly some great co-panel members with me. And the whole event is around learnings and sharing. So just if people are interested, I just thought I'd share that because there is a lot of work going on. And the Internet of Things Alliance, IOTAA, are about to publish a guide in the next few months about that platform standards and governance, just to give people a guidebook to help them with at least the complex technology decisions.
Yeah, cool. No, definitely. And I'll put the links in the show notes so people can click away and head on down Sydney if they're already down there. I think there's a few good conferences coming up in the next couple of months as well. So
there are so many.
Yeah, it's hard. It is hard to. I feel overwhelmed with the amount, and it's very difficult to know what you're going to get. Although I always seem to get something out of it, no matter what the context is, because I just love meeting people and having chats. So
yeah, I'm yet to go to one that's been a waste of time. I mean, yeah, as you said, if the content and the delivery and everything isn't great, you meet the people that you need to meet. I tend to stick to the IoTAA, the ASCA and the Smart Cities events because they're sort of industry driven and they're not vendors. It's about what's really happening and the people that they seem to attract are the people that you get real value from. And I'm sure there's other conferences, but you could do a podcast on its own on smart city conferences in Australia at the moment.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah, well, Smart Cities Week is coming up in October, end of October, so that'll be exciting as well. Yeah, so many. Anyway, I better let you go.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no worries. Talk again soon.
Thank you, and thanks for listening.
It's the Smart City Podcast. Whoa!
Thanks so much for listening to the Smart City Podcast. Show notes for this episode and all other episodes can be found at thesmartcitypodcast.com. If you have any questions or comments for me or any of my guests, connect with me via email, zoe@thesmartcitypodcast.com or via the socials. I'm on Twitter and Facebook @SmartCityPod. As always, I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed making it.
Smart City Podcast is what you're looking for.